Math 3, Unit 3, Section E. So today we're just doing more on factoring. We're specifically working on factoring by grouping. We did a little bit of factoring by grouping yesterday because when I was showing you guys how to factor trinomials, that is factoring by grouping. Okay, and so when you're grouping, there's usually 4 terms or expressions. So remember yesterday how we ended up writing it into 4 terms by splitting that middle term into 2 different numbers. And then you're taking the GCF of your first group and the GCF of your second group. And then your A plus B in this case ends up being your common factor. And so that ends up factoring out as just one A plus B. And then whatever's in front is your second factor. Okay, one thing that you need to be aware of is sometimes you end up with opposites. So do you see here how this is A minus B and here it's B minus A? Anytime you have that, if you were to factor out a negative, so if I were to make this negative, the B becomes a negative, the A becomes a positive. So you know how whenever you divide by negative, it changes signs? And so when you notice that all those change signs, we end up getting a negative 3y here, and then I have a negative b and a positive a, so I can end up rewriting it to a minus b, and so now they're the same. So that will only work, though, if you have a negative in there. Make sense? And so here's another example how, again, these were opposites, and when I take out a negative, this ends up becoming a positive, the y becomes a negative, the x becomes a positive, and I can flip it around to make it x minus y, so then it matches. All right, here we go. So let's go ahead and go to A. Some of the problems you'll notice today, they've already done the first step. So if you ever notice that a problem has parentheses that are like, that's your GCF. So in this case, we're gonna factor out what? An x minus 2. So my GCF is x minus 2, and then all I'm left with is x plus 5. And then again, we always want to check to see if you can factor further. And in this case, you can't. That's your answer. Another thing is we're always checking for GCF first. In this case, our GCF is our parenthesis, right? And so on B, what am I factoring out? X plus 1. And we're left with 9 minus x squared. And can either one of those be factored further? Yeah, the 9 minus x squared, because that is a difference of squares. And 9 I could rewrite as a square and make it 3 squared. And so I have x plus 1. And then remember we're separating these, and so I have 3 minus x and 3 plus x. Make sure that you keep them in the same order. So since 3 was in the front, when you're writing your parenthesis, 3 needs to stay in the front. And same with like the x being at the end, it needs to stay at the end. Because 3 minus x and x minus 3 are totally different. Okay, because this is saying the x is negative, but if I had flipped these around, then you'd be saying the 3 is negative, which is incorrect. Okay. All right, on the second one, what do you notice? I mean, on not the second one, the third one, on C. What do you notice about that one? Yeah, this is flipped, right? So this is x minus 2, and this is 2 minus x. And this is different than this, right? Because here the x is negative, and here the x is positive. So what can we do in order to make that correct? Right, we end up, basically, we're factoring out a negative. And so I'm going to put negative here, and then the 2 will become a negative, and the x will become a positive. And my suggestion is to go ahead and rewrite it so that it is in the correct order, and so this ends up becoming a minus 4, and then when I rewrite this, I'm going to write this as x minus 2. Since the 2 is now negative, I can flip it around in the parenthesis. So now my like term, or my GCF, is x minus 2, so we factor out x minus 2, and we're left with, okay, and can x squared minus 4 be factored further? Yes, because 4 is actually very good. And so we get x minus 2 is still there, and then I get x minus 2 and x plus 2. And what would be a better way of writing that? Good. And so if we were graphing this, we would know then that at x equals 2, there would be what? A bounce, right? Okay. So now getting down to these ones where we don't have the parentheses already done. So what do we do in order to factor by grouping? Good. So we break them into two groups, right? Always check for GCF first. I kind of skipped that, but there's no GCF in this, right? And so if there's no GCF in the whole entire thing, then we'd break it into our two different pieces. And so my GCF for the first group is what? 9. So I take out a 9. And if you want to, you can divide by 9 to both of these if that helps you see what's happening. And I'm left with x minus 1. And the second group, what could I factor out? X squared. Okay, and when I factor out x squared, I'm dividing each of these by x squared, and what am I left with? 1 minus x. And anytime you're taking out a positive number, you might want to go ahead and put a plus there. Okay, and so what would I need to do now in order to make this factorable? Very good. We're going to divide everything by a negative, or factor out a negative in this parentheses. So that's going to become a minus. This becomes a minus, and this one becomes a plus. And we're going to go ahead and rewrite this. So we have 9 and x minus 1. And then I have minus x squared, and then we'll rewrite this as x minus 1. Is anybody confused by either of those steps? We're good? Okay, so now my GCF is x minus 1, and I'm left with 9 minus x squared. 9 minus x squared is 3 squared. And so we end up with x minus 1. And then we factor this, we get 3 minus x and 3 plus x. And again, remember to always keep whatever's in front and whatever's in back in the back. Okay? And this would be the answer. Okay, do you notice a GCF on E? What would be the GCF? So I always, before you say, I always go through and look at my numbers first. So I kind of take it one step at a time when I see a whole bunch of numbers and letters. So is there a number that's a GCF? 4. Okay, and then I start going through and looking at my letters. Okay, this has 3 W's, 2 W's, 2 W's, and 1 W. So that means I can take out a W. And then they don't have any other letters in common because this doesn't have any Z's, so there's no way I could end up taking out a Z. Okay, so with that, I would end up, just to like make sure I do not make a mistake, I usually go through and write my GCF that I'm taking under each of these so that I can see what's happening. So in this one, the 4's cancel out, and I'm left with, good, W squared. This one, the 4's cancel, and then 1 W is going to cancel, right? So I end up with minus W Z. Here, 12 divided by 4 makes a 3. So I have plus 3, and then one of the W's cancels, and so I'm just left with W. And then on this one, 12 divided by 4 makes a 3, and then good, the W's cancel, and I'm just left with a Z. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so next thing, we're going to go ahead and break this into our groups. Okay, what could I factor out of that first group? Good. So we have a W. I kind of forget about the 4W for just a minute because it has nothing to do with me factoring the inside, right? So we take out a W, and I'm left with W minus C. And then here I can factor out a 3, and we're going to write that as a positive 3. And I'm left with, good. And so now my GCF is?
W minus,
yep.
W minus Z.
Very good. W minus Z. And then we're left with our other parenthesis, W plus 3. And then we need to remember to bring down our GCF, which was our 4W. A lot of people forget that. So be careful. I used to, what I would do is once I had the GCF, I'd kind of go to wherever I was going to put my answer and write the 4W and then can finish factoring. So just be careful that you don't forget your 4W there in front. All right, F. I'm going to give you a second to try F on your own. If you have it all the way factored, raise your hand and I will check it. Okay, you guys look here at F. Check to see if you got it right.
Oh, yeah.
So there's no makeup test for unit 2? Is it a regular test?
Serious? I love school so much, don't you, Jordan Fernandez?
It's unit 0, unit 3, unit 4, unit 5. So currently we are in unit 5. So there's a unit 3. I'm thinking of unit 3. And yes, I do have a unit 3. So this is the retake test.
Okay.
This is the one where it was the review that you're supposed to do.
So she should have that? in
She
mind?
should.
Okay, I'll go.
Because we kind of, I think, are doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, were there any questions on F? Do I need to go through F? No, we're good? Okay. Moving on. Okay, so now we get to the fun part, graphing. Which, I mean, the graphing I think is kind of, do you guys think it's a little bit fun this time, or no? No.
When is graphing ever?
I don't know, when it makes curly things,
When
you
it's
know?
straight lines?
Way to kill her mind, guys.
All right, okay, so I guess you guys don't like math like I do. Okay.
No, the graphing.
Ouch.
Everything else, yeah.
Okay. So we just remember again, if we're finding our y-intercept, we're plugging in 0 for x and solving for y. If we're finding our x-intercepts, we're plugging in 0 for y, solving for x. Did I say that the right way originally? Anyways, you guys get it. Okay, G. What will I do first?
Factor out of 2x squared.
You are awesome. That is correct. We factor out a 2x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and write dividing by 2x squared to every term because I do not want to mess up. And I find that when I actually show my work and do stuff like that, I make less errors. Okay? So the 2's cancel out, and then I know that x to the 5th divided by x to the 2nd makes x to the what? Third. Do you guys need this bigger, or is that better? Does anybody want it bigger? Okay. All right, x to the 3rd, plus here 6 divided by 2 is 3, so we have 3x squared. Here the 2's cancel, and so I have a negative x, and then here 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, and the x squareds cancel out. Okay, what's next? Very good. Grouping them. Okay, so in my first group, what could I factor out?
X squared.
Okay, and then I'm left with,
X plus 3.
okay, my next group, what will I factor out?
-1.
Good job. And we're left with x plus 3, good. And again, if you want to write -1 underneath each of these to see what happens. Okay, so now my GCF is x plus 3. I'm left with x squared minus 1, and I need to bring down my 2x squared. Okay, can any of those factor further?
Yep.
What?
X squared minus 1.
Good. So we end up with 2x squared, x plus 3, x plus 1, and x minus 1, right? Because 1 is really the same as 1 squared. Okay, what would be my next step in order to graph these? Good. Put them in our little columns so that we set each of them equal to 0. Okay, so 2x squared, when I set that equal to 0, what does it equal? 0. If you're ever not sure, set it equal to 0 and solve it. Okay, but 0 divided by anything is 0. The square root of 0, 0. Okay, but what also do we notice at 0? It has a multiplicity of 2. So when I plot 0, 0 here, and you could do them one at a time, we know that's going to end up being a bounce. And again, why is it a bounce? It has an even number. It has a multiplicity of 2. Okay, this next one is going to be x equals what? -3 for me. Everybody's could be at a different order. So I'm going to put a point at -3, and is that going to be a bounce or passing through? Passing through. This one is x equals -1, and that is a passing through. Okay, and then this one's gonna be a 1, and that is also a passing through. Are we all clear on what's passing through and what's bouncing?
Yes.
Okay, so going back to our unfactored form, what degree is this?
Fifth.
It's a 5th degree, and my leading coefficient is
2.
2, positive 2. I'm just gonna put positive. So that means that what?
They'll be going opposite direction.
Opposite directions, but the first one will be a, so, sorry, the right end behavior will be positive infinity, and my left end behavior will be negative infinity. Okay, so we can go ahead and graph this, right? Because do I need to find my y-intercept? We've already found my y-intercept, correct? Because if you have a point at 0, 0, it's already on the y-axis, so you don't even have to worry about plugging anything in and finding it. Okay, so we're going to start at negative. We pass through. Okay, so remember, passing through goes through that axis. Okay, we turn it around. It's going to pass through here, right? We turn it around, it bounces. So that means it touches the point, but then turns again, right? So touches it, goes back down, and then we're going to turn around and it's going to pass through. And did it start negative and end positive? Yes. And so that's a great way of double checking that you did it correctly. Okay, questions on this one? No? All right, go ahead and try H on your own. Okay, if you have it all worked out, I'll come around and check it. For real this time, I hope.
You guys can use
So that can be it, so, you know, send that. There's no X there. Okay. Because when you factor it out, x is equal to 2 does not equal 0. There's no x there. So when x equals 0, when you factor out an x, then you have like an x equals 0. Does that make sense? But 2 equals 0, 2 does not equal 0. 2 equals 2, right? And so that's why you don't, it's not crossing at 0. So you're going to erase that 0, 0 mark. So you might want to erase your graph because it's going to change a little bit. Okay, I'm going to start going through this one. Okay, so first of all, most of you noticed that there was a GCF of 2. Okay, so I factor out a 2, I divide each of these by 2, and I get x to the third plus 3x squared minus 9x minus 27. Okay, so then I go through factoring by grouping. I group these, and I have x squared, and then x plus 3. Here I factor out a negative 9, and I have x plus 3. So my GCF is x plus 3, and I'm left with x squared minus 9, and I still have my 2 in front. This can be factored further, so I have x plus 3 and x minus 3 for my difference of squares. So I notice that there's two x plus 3's, so I write that as x plus 3 squared, and then I have x minus 3. Okay, when I set these equal to 0, 2 equals 0, because I would set them up as equations. 2 does not equal 0. This is not a factor. That one is out. Okay, here I have x equals negative 3, and we know that one's going to bounce, so I go to negative 3, and I'm going to put a bounce because it has a multiplicity of 2. This one, x equals 3. So we go right 1, 2, 3, make a point, and this is going to be passing through. Now, if you notice, there is no y-intercept here. So that means I need to find my y-intercept. Finding your y-intercept is easiest to go back to your original equation back here. And if you think about this, and if you want to, you can write out all the work, or you could not. But if I plug in 0 for x, this will become 0, this becomes 0, this becomes 0, and what does this become?
Attention all teachers, if you have not turned in your summary of attendance report, it was pink, or if you've not picked it up from your mailbox, please do so. It was due yesterday. Get it to the attendance office ASAP. Thank you.
Okay, so if I plug in 0 for all these, this ends up becoming 0 plus 0. Okay, you could have a plus, this becomes 0 too. You could leave it as a minus. Plus 0, minus 0, doesn't really matter. And then I have minus 54. So I end up getting y equals negative 54. So the ordered pair is 0, negative 54. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And so remember, that's why there's nothing marked on your y-axis. So all we have to do is just make a marking, and we put negative 54 and a point there. Okay? So what degree did this end up having? Degree of 3. So that means that my leading coefficient, also my leading coefficient is what? Positive 2. And so my right end behavior is going to be positive, and my left end behavior will be negative. And so we start negative, it bounces, so I go back down, I go through negative 54, and I pass through, and it's going up. And so there's my graph. Okay. Any questions? Okay, did you guys see where you went wrong? We're good?